Today, whether we like it or not, we are constantly bombarded with news and views. You pick up your phone and all you see is fraud, ignorance, corruption, selfishness, vindictiveness, lust, avarice, ambition, pride. One can go on. The more I think about this, the more worried I get. For between you, I, and algorithms, we'll soon get more and more conditioned to think that humans are led only by self interest. This will then become a self fulfilling prophecy. We'll expect and anticipate the worst from the human nature, and the world will conform to our bias, which is why I was very relieved to read Rutger Bregman's Humankind, a Hopeful History, and which is why I thought I should recommend this to you. Most Western philosophy assumes that human nature is driven by purely by self interest, probably colored by the clear distinction between a very human Adam who commits the original sin and a very divine God who is the source of grace, forgiveness, and salvation. According to Descartes, free will, which is basically man's ability to think and act at his own discretion, is the sign of God in human nature. So, how you use free will decide whether inherently you are good or otherwise. Rousseau believed that primitive man was noble, a noble savage, and that it was the structures of modern civilization that made him self centered. Recently, Richard Dawkins wrote in his classic The Selfish Gene that the predominant quality that helps a gene survive is ruthless selfishness. He then concludes, and I quote, this gene selfishness will usually give rise to selfishness in human behavior. Rutger Bregman fights this and makes a case for innate goodness in the human being. His approach is multidisciplinary and he looks at philosophy, history, science, and everything in between to build his argument. He presents us with a whole lot of examples. If you remember William Golding's Lord of the Flies, where a group of British boys are marooned on an island and soon discover the beast within them. But Bergman talks about the real life version where six boys from Tonga, aged between 13 and 16, were shipwrecked on a Pacific island in 1965. The first decision they took was not to fight, and they devised a timeout for whenever there was an argument or a quarrel between them. By the time they were rescued, some 15 months later, guess what? They had a food garden, they had a chicken pen, they had hollowed out tree trunks to store rainwater, they had a badminton court, they had a gym, and they had figured a permanent source of fire. While Golding's fictional boys discovered their inherent beast, Tonga's real life boys discovered their inherent angel. Bergman continues with many examples, including stories like the time German and British soldiers had a spontaneous ceasefire to celebrate Christmas in 1914 around the World War One. I remember reading this in Reader Digest as a kid, and I always thought this was an urban myth. Well, Bergman believes that expecting good from people and behaving accordingly has its self fulfilling merits. He shares the example of prisons in Norway that treat inmates as inherently good humans, allowing them to work, to play, to make music, as opposed to the American or say Indian prison that treats inmates as criminals. The astonishing fact is the Norway has the least repeat offenders in the world. You can't argue with data, can you? I request you to take a look at this book in a time when it is easy to look around and give up in frustration at the new ways of the new world. Bergman does build a case for having a high expectations from our fellow human beings. I also request you, whenever you have the time and the inclination, to go back and look at the Jataka tales, where the Buddha recalls some of his past lives. Look at the simple stories like the Banyan deer, the brave little parrot, the selfless hare, and many others, which begin with suffering but tell you how humans can rid the world of suffering by their sheer will and their effort. This is a better world to believe in than a world of self interest. Don't you think so?